Hello and welcome everybody to this week's conversation on Z-Axis TV. I'm your host. My name is Leah Zalams and I'm an executive coach, and I love to speak with thought leaders and people who are following their passion and making positive change happen in the world. And today we have the wonderful Nadia Bilchik with us, and Nadia has a phenomenal background in journalism, in corporate, in speaking, in leadership training, and she's coming to us all the way from Atlanta and over in the US. So it's 8 a.m. for me here in Sydney, and it's, what time is it for you there,
6
Nadia?
p.m. here in Atlanta, Georgia, Eastern Time.
Isn't it incredible? And you're going into summer and we're going into winter. You know, it's incredible how the world all works.
I just think it's so wonderful, Leah, that because of this virtual expansion, that you and I, who have never met in person, can have this wonderful opportunity to connect. And I love the way we connected, which was through a third party. So one of the things I speak about is that networking is about having a connection, but then having that conversation that leads to tonight, which is a collaboration. So thank you so much, Leah, for following up and for being proactive. And that's what makes you such an incredible coach.
Thank you so much, Nadia. And I think, like, to frame up our conversation today around how difficult it still is in today's world, with all the technology, with all the empowerment, with all the training, with all the coaching that is available to us today. It is still difficult for a lot of women working in male-dominated industries. And let's face it, most industries still are male-dominated, aren't they? Why? And I thought, I wanted to delve in a little bit, into you and your story and your experience in this area, and what are some of the strategies or the things that you have done to overcome these biases and the difficulties that just seem to be so incredibly difficult to shift from my experience. So I'm really keen to hear from you what your experience is in this area as well. But why don't we start with a little bit, if you could give us a little bit of your background, where you've come from, and what you do today, and who you do that for as your career.
Thank you, Leah. So I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, and South Africa is a very patriarchal society, so very male-dominated, and moved to Georgia in 1997, and I was very fortunate that I moved in August of 1997, and in December of 1997 I was anchoring for something called the CNN Airport Network. Now, I'd been a primetime anchor in Johannesburg, South Africa for Mnet television, and I always tell the story that the reason I got to CNN was not because I knew some higher up or because of any great feat. It was because I knew the head of security at Mnet Television, and he knew the head of security at CNN. And I handed, Leah, in 1997, my then VHS demo tapes to a lovely man called
I remember VHS tapes.
And I handed him my demo tapes, and I got called in for an audition. And I started my career at CNN in 1997. Anchoring for the CNN Airport Network, and then doing various shows for CNN International, and then hosting some shows for the weekend CNN Morning Passport. And through all of that, I always taught and trained and spoke. I realized very early on.
What drew you into what caused you to choose this path? If we just, like, there's many things you would have done. I would imagine you would have been very, very bright at school and very ambitious and very driven, right? Because that's part of your character. But
Well, it's so
why?
interesting, Leah,
Yeah.
because my three siblings are all physicians. And people ask me, weren't you interested in medicine? And I go, I could not do math and science to save my life. So I was good at acting and English and really bad when it came to STEM subjects. So I don't know that I could have done anything. But I was very fortunate when I moved to Atlanta to get in with CNN because it provided such a wonderful platform and it's such a really magnificent global organization. And I met so many different people. But as a female in broadcasting, and I knew this when I started in my early 20s being on camera, I knew that it was one of those careers that wasn't kind to older women. Now, interestingly enough, there are certain, there are wonderful role models that we have in this country of people who have certainly continued their broadcast careers, but they're few and far between. And I managed to stay on air beyond 50, which I always thought was quite remarkable. But simultaneously to having an on-air career, I've always taught and trained, and I actually did a speech and drama teacher's degree at the Trinity College of London, and I studied speech and drama. So I began my career acting in feature films. And I was being interviewed for a feature film when I decided I'd much rather be the interviewer than the interviewee, which, by the way, is difficult for me that you're interviewing me because I'm much more interested in you and your work.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
I was doing this interview, and that's how I got into television. So it's just an interesting path that you take. And certainly,
but it's also that you knew yourself, Nadia, that you took note of where your strengths were and where they were not. And then you were also, sounds like you were able to not do the norm, right? Perhaps, was there pressure for you to follow suit simply because that's, all of the stuff that goes on
in the 80s was a little horrified that his daughter wanted to go to the University of Cape Town Drama School because it was, how do you make a living? And I'm so fortunate that my mother was very, very encouraging. But actually what I learned at drama school in terms of communication and voice and presence, and one of the books I co-wrote, Laurie, was called Owning Your Space. And the concept of owning your space came from acting, because one of the things we were taught is you really have to embody whatever character you're playing and just feel at ease and comfortable. So owning your space. So I've used a lot of the lessons around voice and presence and presentation skills and storytelling, both in terms of my own on-camera presence, but also helping individuals with their presence and presentation skills and executive presence, and now, of course, webcam presence and virtual presence. And women...
And that is so important for women in particular, isn't it?
Well, women tend to be more self-deprecating. And really, Leah, I'm not saying all women are self-deprecating, but we tend to see what we don't do right versus what we do right. Although I will say my presentation skills classes are as filled with men as women, but women tend, and I hate to genderize, but we are very self-critical. And that's one of the first things that I know you and I spoke about. What will women take away from this? It's that, and Eleanor Roosevelt famously said it, comparison is the thief of joy.
And also, I think she also said something about that we are responsible for owning our power, that we actually give it away. It can't be taken. We actually give it away. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, because there is the executive presence aspect, I think, has never been more important, actually.
What's so interesting is you and I come at it from very different places, because I know with you as an executive coach and with your incredible background in corporate and your vast experience, you come at it from a lot of strategy and looking at those things. And by the way, I happen to know Leah is excellent at what she does. I look at it from a point of view of how are you presenting yourself, but how are you presenting yourself like you do starts with mindset. You know, it's not about just doing the Amy Cuddy and the hands on the hips.
I have taught that before, though.
Well, I teach similar techniques, but it's more about relationship with self and self-dialogue. What messages are you giving yourself? So I have an acronym that I call FIRE because we really wanted to give people concrete, tangible takeaways today. And the first part of FIRE is how I feel about myself. And am I giving myself sabotaging messages? So what are the sabotaging messages? I'm not good enough. I don't deserve it. Am I really qualified? Versus developing inventory of positive past experiences and reminding yourself that yes, you are capable and yes, you are worthy. So that's the F of lighting the fire.
That's amazing. Yes. And those self-sabotaging, the language, it's constant, isn't it?
And be aware of it, you know. And again, nothing you and I talk about is revelationary. I like to say we share it in a revelationary way. But if you are joining us today, it's that ability to become very aware. You know, think about this. I did a wonderful program, Leah, and I know you'll appreciate this. It's Emery's Dalai Lama School, and it was around compassionate behavior therapy. And the first part of compassion, of course, begins with what? Compassion
for self.
Compassion for self. And we did this exercise that I absolutely love. So Leah and I are friends, and Leah tells me she's made a terrible mistake and she blundered on something or her slides didn't work. And what do I say? I go, Leah, it's not the end of the world. You have such an excellent reputation. You're so highly thought of. People didn't notice, right? But if Nadia blunders with her slides, what do I say to myself? You stupid, you shouldn't have done that. But isn't that interesting? We're so much kinder to other people often than we are to ourselves.
We are. But, you know, is it that men don't self-sabotage? They have those same negative Nancy thinking going on as well. But I think it was one of the big consulting, I mean, there's always surveys being done, but yeah, but they, you know, and it's like the data showed that 80% of their mid-tier women, so the women that were just below sea level and sea level was their next step, 80% were not putting themselves forward and were dominated by those I'm not good enough thoughts. And they didn't believe that the men in the cubicles next to them or the screen next to them now had those thoughts. And that they didn't seem to be bothered by the same type of thinking. And so, you know, is it that also that perhaps we will say that we self-sabotage and that men don't say it, and so they will fake it till they make it better? I mean, again, it's hard to generalize, isn't it? Because I think
it is hard to generalize. And what I say to the women who attend my seminars and workshops is, we can't control others, right? We know that. What can we control is ourselves. We can control our sense of self. And I recently did a program, Leah, with a group of women in a very male-dominated industry. And one of the things they said is they'll be in a meeting and people will talk over them. So how do you and I, as coaches, as speakers? So we spoke about strategies around in a way that feels authentic and gracious, simply putting your hand out and say, appreciate that thought. I just want to finish, using body language, the verbal and the non-verbal, to assert yourself, but not in a way that feels aggressive because we wouldn't be comfortable with that. So simply doing that rather than being a victim. The book I spoke about, Own Your Space, we did many interviews with very, very successful, accomplished women. And the one thing all these women had in common was, I am not limiting myself, but also if I find myself sensing that somebody is being patronizing or talking over me, I will very quickly assert myself, establish my credibility and my knowledge.
How do you do that? We'll come back to how you do
that. I won't.
Yeah.
So many of them said, yes, I may have felt that from time to time, but I never let it stop me. I very quickly established my knowledge. And maybe you do have to work a little harder, but not one of them. And I hate to use the word victim because the reality is there are many, many situations where you are overlooked and you are spoken over and you aren't given the chance. And I understand all of that. But what you and I both want to do is empower people to feel like they have the ability and they have the skills and the techniques and the methodology and the mindset to overcome that.
That's right, because there would be people that would say, but Nadia, you're strong, or that's part of your character. It's
Correct.
easy for you to do that.
Exactly.
I'm not like that. And so I'm not like that. And that comes back, I think, to your comparison element too, that we're comparing even when we're not thinking we're comparing. Like that comment alone is a comparison statement. Is someone saying, oh, it's not in my character to do that, right? And this is where it's all skills development, isn't it? And
Yes.
that's what I
And not
love
only
about the
character,
practical.
you bring up such a good point. It's not only character, it's also
Yeah.
upbringing. So I spoke back to
Yeah.
South Africa being a very patriarchal society. So not only is it a patriarchal society, but up until 1990, the first democratic election, 1994, when I work with South African women, not only was there apartheid, particularly Black South African women, but it's patriarchal. So you're at a male dominated boardroom or at a table or a virtual call, and their subconscious triggers in of these are men, these are maybe in my mind more status. So the ability to go, I have a right to speak up when historically I may not have. Or how was I raised? We know that certain Asian cultures tend to, let's say, tend to acknowledge and respect people who are maybe more quiet and demure. Now, many of my clients face having to be in a situation where they're expected to be more dominating and expected to be more outgoing. I did a session this morning, and there was a young lady who was from India in the session, and she said, it's so interesting because in Indian culture, the way she was raised, you get straight to the point. Now she's working in North America, and there's this chit chat. So we came up with a plethora of questions that you can ask.
Yeah.
And one of the framework that I give people is that everybody has a past, a present, and a future. So if you run out of things to say, ask people questions. And we came up with questions so that she's got a whole inventory of questions that she can ask. To your point, it's developing the skill set. But you mentioned something very important there, which is the first thing is to acknowledge and become aware of the inner dialogue and perception of self and what triggers you.
When it sounds like common sense, doesn't it? Like
and isn't that the hardest?
It is the hardest. And I think, especially when we look at people in leadership roles, they are on stage, they are being watched, they are being judged, they are being in the spotlight. So these are skills they must have. And I think that is why, partly why there's been so much focus and investment in leadership training of your executive teams. And but are we doing enough? Are we doing enough of the right things? Because we look at the quality of leadership in the world today, Nadia.
Well,
I know.
that's a vast topic. But Leah, I always congratulate the companies that hire a you or hire a me. And without sounding self-serving and self-promoting, because what are you doing when you bring in someone in the area of professional development? You are investing in your people. I say this every time you bring in Coach Leah or Speaker Nadia, or you're saying to people, I care about you. I want to invest in you. Today, I worked with a group of individuals in a big consulting company. And these were consultants around the world, from Dubai to Dallas to Durban, many continents. And all we spoke about for 90 minutes was the concept of virtual engagement and how you connect, collaborate, and engage virtually. Because yes, while many people have gone back to work, global teams are still having to connect and communicate virtually. And it was such an interactive, wonderful, participative session. And there were some hard skills, but there was also a shift in mindset, and there was a development of camaraderie. And people feel like they had been given a gift, a present. And that's how we want to make employees feel, right? We invested in you, we cared about you. When you're hired as a coach by a corporation to coach an executive, what you're saying to that executive is, we value you enough to bring in somebody to work with you. That's huge.
It is. It is. And it is something that big companies and governments have been doing for many, many years. But what I find in the small to medium business sector is that this is not part of their investment plan, right? They're not getting the same opportunity and to invest both the time and the money to do the personal growth that has to happen for the business growth to happen. Because that is the thing, that the leader's growth is so directly and indirectly connected to the growth of the business and the growth of their people, isn't it? Like, and it's not a tangible thing, but it's a real thing.
Say, how do you quantify that, Leah? How
Yeah.
do you, and I'm curious about how you do that. How do you quantify bringing you in to help grow, nurture, develop? Because of course, the famous thing, are leaders born or made? So that's a Leah question.
Yes, definitely, isn't it? And this is also where you're speaking with other coaches and leadership development specialists. Companies are wanting to show a return on investment, and we know it's not an X plus Y equals Z. It's not a direct correlation. So, and this is where I will use assessments like the mental toughness assessment before and after, so we can see a change over time.
Tell me about the mental toughness assessment.
This is a wonderful personality psychology assessment that has been developed by Professor Peter Clough and Doug Strakarczyk of AQR International, and it's been investigated and researched now for 3 decades. So it's got a lot of academic research across the board, through sport, through business, and education as well. And what it does, it shows us our attitudes of how we think under pressure. And we're looking through the frame of the 4 C's of mental toughness, which is challenge, control, commitment, and confidence. And then there are 2 sub-factors for each of those categories. So you've got a really strong lens they're all attitudes. So it's very much, what is our natural responsiveness under pressure? And it shows us where we can work specifically developmentally to, it's more than develop a tough skin. It is more about a overarching growth around self-awareness. And the assessment itself can be enough of a trigger for change, because it gives you such a deep awareness in all of those factors of who you are and how you're performing under pressure. And leaders are constantly under pressure, and it is and the pressure of companies to say, well, if I take you on, how many more sales will I get, or how will my revenue grow? That's not a fair question. And so we've got to have other ways of measuring it, testing and measuring, if you like. And also, we don't know, the work that we do today may not show up and be really obvious for years to come. It's not a linear effect.
Right. But if you think about what you're saying, what pressure have organizations been under since March of 2020?
Exactly.
And the organizations whose leadership has managed to galvanize, adapt, and be agile under pressure are those that have survived and thrived.
Yes.
So
and
what a critical skill.
Yes. And this is where that adaptability has become the new word, adaptability and flexibility.
And so agility, right?
Yes.
Agility, the
be
ability
quick.
to, yes, absolutely. You know, when you think about the famous analogies of you can't turn a cumbersome ship around and take time, because companies that did that, the Blockbusters and the Kodaks and you name them, were overtaken by the Netflixes and the Apples. So we have to be agile. And it's very interesting because look what COVID forced people to do. I hope you've got Zoom shares. Do you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. Zoom, yes, StreamYard, well, it's Zoom. I mean, these are household names now. And so there wouldn't be many people that don't know how to do Zoom. Whereas prior to COVID, even, I mean, Skype, a lot of people didn't really know how to use Skype, and you would much rather meet for coffee face to face. But I think that's also where a lot of the work you do, teaching how to be more effective on, virtually. I'm just wondering, we've got a couple of minutes left, and be great to have one or two tips that you have found that have really helped communication and team effectiveness of working online.
Well, I said that I would share lighting the fire. And the first part of lighting the fire is related to self, how you feel about yourself. Yeah. But on all platforms, if we're talking about executive presence, leadership presence, presentation skills, the eye of lighting the fire is interest. Who is your audience? Who am I speaking to? Am I genuinely curious and interested? And then the R is, in this particular time of our lives, the ability to respect other and the ability to see the world from another person's point of view. And a lot of the team building that I do and the sharing is radical regard and mutual respect and understanding, as Paula Caligari says in her book, Cultural Agility, the ambiguity of different cultures and different ways of seeing. And the E of lighting a fire is both empathy and energy. And energy particularly is both what you say and how you say it. So Leah, I spent a lot of time working with individuals, both on crafting content, but also mastering delivery. Because if we're going to be more impactful, both in person, virtually, and in hybrid scenario, it's not only what you say, but you have to be very aware of body language and eye contact in a virtual world, lighting and background. So the reality is I end with lighting the fire, which is how you feel about yourself, showing interest, relationships, respect, and empathy and energy. And that's in a nutshell. But I do have a whole TEDx talk on it. It's TEDx Emory, and it's called Own Your Confidence.
Do we have a link for that, Nadia?
It's very easy to just Google TEDx Emory, Nadia Bilchik, Bilchik, Own Your Confidence. TEDx Emory, Own Your Confidence. And I tried to encapsulate in all of 11 and a half minutes many of my thoughts. But Leah, while you're finding that and I'm chatting, my mantra, and interesting, tomorrow I'm going to be speaking to a group of women around the concept of exactly what you've said, resilience and change. And I think you put it so well, and I know this is something you coach on, which is the ability to adapt and to let go and to move on and learn new things is not only important, but critical to our survival right now. And the fact that you and I, who are both, I don't know about you, but I'm a Boomer X, can be
Yes.
live on StreamYard with you as our producer and me as the guest and know what to do, I think that's a moment to celebrate.
Oh, look, it certainly is, Nadia. And, I, I always love connecting with other women on fire, and you are definitely a woman on fire. And I really hope that one day, somewhere in the world, we will be able to meet each other face to face, perhaps at a conference somewhere. I'm dying to travel again. Yes. Yes.
That would be wonderful.
That would be. And so where is it best for people to contact you? I've got some.
My website is nadiaspeaks.com.
www.nadia. And of course, if nadiaspeaks.com. So if people are looking for a speaker or for workshop facilitator, particularly around empowerment and leadership, communication, executive presence.
Networking to level the playing field.
Networking, yes. It is. It's about finding common ground and then looking at how we can amplify from there. And that's certainly the purpose for these discussions.
Leah, I love that you use the word amplify, because David Asano and I have just got to the end of writing our book, and it is called Ramplify, and it's about how do you ramp up and amplify. So thank you for mentioning that, and I look forward to chatting to you about that.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, we will. And when will that be published?
I am happy to say that our wonderful, wonderful writer who is collaborating with us will have the manuscript all done. I did lots of interviews both in South Africa and in the US. So hopefully, and David did interviews, we'll have that manuscript ready towards the end of the month and hopefully available soon.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And again, stories sell. We want to hear people's stories, don't we? Who's the person behind the success and behind the impact. And I've really enjoyed our conversation today, Nadia. I really value your time and everything that you're doing in the world, and will definitely stay in touch and have you back again when you are ready with the book.
Thank you, Leah. It's been a great pleasure, from Sydney to Atlanta, and a 14-hour difference.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us.